Good evening and welcome everyone to the May 20th, 2014 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It is my privilege to call this meeting to order. There are copies of our agenda that we will be following tonight on both sides of the room. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to avail yourself of a copy and follow along with our items of business tonight. It is our custom to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. So at this point, I would invite everyone to please rise and join us in reciting the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask our fine village clerk, April Holden, to please call the roll.
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Olson?
Here.
Commissioner Rankin?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Here.
Commissioner Durkin? Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you. That brings us to item 3 on our agenda, which pertains to minutes of prior council meetings. We have one set of minutes to review and approve tonight, and those are our minutes from our regular council meeting on May 13th, 2014. If any members of the village council have any questions, comments, corrections, or changes to those minutes? Hearing none, seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Those minutes are approved. Terrific. That brings us right to item 4, which is reserved for public comment with respect to items of a general nature. If there are any members of the audience here tonight who have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to items that are not on our business agenda later tonight, we would invite you to please come to the podium, share with us your name and address, and we would welcome hearing from you. Are there any members of the audience with any questions or comments of a general nature tonight? Seeing no stirrings in the audience, we move to item 5. And by the way, there will be opportunities to comment with respect to items that are on our agenda tonight. With that, we'll move to item 5, which is reserved for council member reports. It's an opportunity for council members to share with the community various goings-on in our community and other items of interest. Commissioner Barnett, you want to kick us off tonight, please?
I have nothing, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Olson?
No report.
Commissioner Jose?
No report.
Commissioner Rankin?
No report.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Thank you, Mayor. I was honored to represent the village today at ComEd at their Oak Brook office. They had a pep rally for some students who were heading to the National Spelling Bee, and one of Downers Grove School's very own Miss Assad, I'm looking for her name here, Nafisa Assad is a student at Herrick Junior High, and she won the local DuPage County region and is going into the National Spelling Bee in Washington, D.C. So ComEd is the sponsor of her trip there. So they held a nice pep rally for her and 2 other students from the area. It was great to see a Downers Grove student doing so well and going to be representing our community in the National Spelling Bee. They'll be on ESPN starting next week, so we'll be sure to watch for her, and we wished her well. And I gave her a very lucky lapel pin from the Village of Downers Grove. I think they have very strict guidelines on dress code at the National Spelling Bee, so she may not be able to present it while on ESPN, but she'll definitely have it with her. So good luck to Nafisa, and safe travels to her and her family. Thank you.
Terrific. And Commissioner, thank you very much for representing the Village Council and the village at that event today. Greatly appreciated. Now, for my own part, I just want to remind everyone, of course, of all the services and ceremonies that are taking place this weekend in observance of Memorial Day. As is tradition in the Village of Downers Grove, Alexander Bradley Burns American Legion Post number 80 will host Memorial Day ceremonies on Monday, Memorial Day, May 26, 2014. The day begins at 8 a.m. with a memorial service at the American Legion Post located at 4000 Saratoga Avenue. From 8:30 until 9:45 a.m., the Post's Honor Guard will then visit 6 area cemeteries to salute fallen veterans. The annual Memorial Day Parade here in Downers Grove will begin at 10:45 a.m. at Burlington Avenue and Main Street, and then proceed south down Main Street to Grove Street, and of course turning the corner and then ending in Fishel Park. And then the annual Memorial Day ceremony and observance will be held in Fishel Park beginning at 11 o'clock a.m. on Memorial Day. I hope to see many of our friends and neighbors there. It is always quite an impactful ceremony, and I've had the privilege to participate in it, for many years, and always am honored and privileged to do so. That's all I have for my report. We'll move on to item 6, public hearings. We have no public hearings tonight. So we'll move to item 7. Just for those keeping score at home, item 7D listed on the agenda has been moved to the active agenda which is under 8. So there will be 3 items under the active agenda. Former 7D, as in David, is now moving under item 8, our active agenda.
I believe that is item E, the
Oh, I'm
final
sorry, I
plat.
circled the wrong one, my mistake. Somebody said E and I circled D. Thank you for that
It's
correction.
both, I believe.
Pardon me?
It's both?
I think it's just E.
Just E.
Just E.
Just the final plat one. So, start again, take 2. Item 7E is in Edward under the consent agenda is being moved to the active agenda for separate consideration. So with that correction, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to any of the items remaining on the consent agenda? Any questions or comments from members of the village council? Hearing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, consent agenda has been approved unanimously. That brings us to item 8, our active agenda. We now have 3 items on our active agenda. First, do I have a motion to authorize $36,776.40 for membership dues for DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference, DMMC, for fiscal year 2014-2015?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the village council? Commissioner Barnett?
Mayor, I just want to let you know I'll be a nay vote on this tonight. I continue to have reservations about DMMC, both the organization and its effectiveness on our behalf, and whether or not that's the most wise use of our resources, both in terms of dollars as well as our personal and staff time. I know this is sort of an ongoing trial, if you will, in hopes, our collective hopes to be sure that they end up a better organization than they were in the past. I'm skeptical and will be a nay vote this evening.
Thank you for that. Other questions or comments from members of the village council? Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, Mayor, I just wanted to mention, I think one of the concerns that I have with DMMC is the recent action and position on legislation that was seeming to be horse trading, and it was certainly fleshed out in the press in I think, quite a negative light. There was a lot of talk that I heard from people in the neighborhood and residents speaking negatively about the organization's position on that specific issue, and certainly that is a concern of mine, and I'm pleased that the organization took steps to quickly rectify the position, and I hope that under its new and incoming leadership will not take any such positions in the future. But given all that, I still think it is very valuable for us to work both formally and informally with other municipalities in DuPage County. I think it's important that we be able to work collectively, and we've seen some opportunities recently with certain contracts that we've done jointly with other municipalities around the county. I think this is very positive work that we're doing with our fellow municipalities in the county, and I think it's important that we continue to be a part of DuPage Mayors and Managers and play a leading role, especially this year. And then I look forward, after the incoming leadership and your leadership, Mayor, and Dave's leadership, to reassessing and the effectiveness of the organization and seeing how it's changed since we had our first vote on this last year and set some objectives at that time. So I look forward to that. I look forward to supporting our continued membership in the upcoming year, and I hope that we can be an effective participant and the organization can work effectively on our behalf as we seek these ever more important opportunities to collaborate with our fellow municipalities. That's all, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Newstead?
Thank you, Mayor. In the last couple of years, I have been against this expenditure for lots of reasons. Some of those reasons included how the conference worked, how they presented themselves, and the legislative issue is one of the things that has always troubled me. But in this last few months, actually, I've had an experience which has changed my mind, I think. seeing our village manager work in the Budget and Operations Committee of the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference, it was an idea led by Manager Fieldman. It was an idea that was executed by Manager Fieldman with assistance from mayors and manager staff, and that, in effect, saved us about $20,000 of financial benefit to the village. That alone doesn't cover the return on investment of Dave's time, I don't think, because I believe Dave's time is extremely valuable. But his knowledge and his ability to come up with an idea, get it through the Mayors and Managers Conference, and then to an actual end result that benefited our village is huge. And it is an exact example of how this organization can change to not only benefit us, but in that case, it benefited many other municipalities that were in the loan. We also have in our materials here a multi-municipality public works contract, and those are more of the things that I think that the COG can do to benefit not only the village of Downers Grove, but our other municipal partners. So, in line with Commissioner Olson, I think the legislative issue, and I've called it lots of other things to my colleagues and others, but it was a rough patch for mayors and managers. I think our two representatives did the right thing, and they represented our community very well, Mayor Tully and Manager Fieldman. But that's definitely a place that needs to be worked on. And in my opinion, if there's an issue that is facing Mayors and Managers Conference that has an ounce of consternation, it should remain neutral. And the organization should not put something up that is potentially going to have municipalities going against each other. It's just my opinion, one of many council members across the county. But in this case, in this year, I think with Dave's and Martin's ability to be part of the administration and part of the leadership of this organization, I will support our membership this year, but I will be also watching. I think we haven't set our committee assignments yet, but it seems as though there is more information being shared with council members on what is happening at those committee meetings. And I'm hopeful that in the future, we see these municipal public works contracts save us more than 2%, as I think we can. So I will be supporting it this year, but with a close eye on that return on investment for Manager Fieldman's time, our entire staff time, everyone that participates in the different committees, our council staff time, our council time, at the different committees that we'll represent. Downers Grove is a municipal leader, and maybe it's taken me a couple years to see that membership in an organization like this promotes our leadership across the county, and I think that's an important position for us to be in. So I will be supporting it this year and appreciate the time that Mayor Tully and Manager Fieldman will be spending with the organization, as well as our colleagues and our staff members. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments? Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't want to repeat what any of my colleagues have said, but I too share much concern with regard to how certain legislative issues came about and were handled. But putting that aside, I think there is much benefit to be derived from maintaining our membership in DuPage Mayors and Managers. I think we've seen some return on investment. I look forward to additional return on investment with Mayor Tully and Manager Fieldman taking even greater leadership roles. And I hope to see not just that dollars and cents return on investment in this year, but I hope to see it in future years as well. I'd like to see some systemic improvements in the organization. And I think that the village has done a very good job in starting to lead those, and I think we can continue to. And I hope that the Downers Grove way continues to permeate the MMC, not just this year, but in future years. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but I will,
Sorry, neither was
since
I,
I'm
so
the
go
last
ahead.
one that had said anything. I'd echo a lot of what some of my colleagues have said, that I was proud to be a Downers Grove Commissioner when Manager Fieldman and Martin, made the choices that they did. And although the result wasn't great, how that all played out, I think they made good choices, and I look to their leadership to maybe change the course and continue down a path of good things for Downers Grove, and I'm hopeful that you guys will be able to make the changes that you hope to see in DuPage Mayors and Managers. So, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll just say, as I said before, I think that it is more important now than ever before that municipalities and other public bodies communicate collaborate and cooperate whenever they can. And this is a great vehicle by which to do that. There are almost 35 different municipalities within the organization, and it's going to come as no surprise that occasionally they don't agree. There are only 7 of us here on this dais, 6 tonight, and we don't always agree on everything. But there are a lot of good things that can be achieved in a much more forceful and effective manner through those 35 different communities and the million voices that they represent collectively than even we can as leaders in Downers Grove sometimes. Some of the projects, and I'll come back to the lobbying on legislative issues in a moment, but even just some of the projects with respect to Fire Services Stakeholders Group, the Mosquito Abatement Task Force, working with the county with respect to their stormwater efforts to make sure that municipalities are appropriately represented and not trodden upon during that process, I think is something that is very important, and the ability to do that as a organization representing 1 million people in 35 municipalities is very forceful. I have seen, I think, I know I've seen improvements in terms of benefits both to us as a member as well as to the organization as a whole, but I agree with my colleagues, there's more that can be done. And that's part of the reason why we're making this investment of time as a organization and as individuals to not only improve that benefit to our community, but to improve the benefit to all municipalities in DuPage County, their memberships. And I'll be very frank, I'm going to be investing a lot of time in this, and I'm looking for a return on my investment. It's not being done for grins and giggles or for anything else. There are other things I could be doing with my time. But I do think it's important. I think that's why we've made the commitment to do it, and I appreciate my colleagues' support. I think, unfortunately, the position that was taken and then not taken with respect to the extension of the state income tax is something that can easily be avoided, and it was a lesson learned. I don't think it was a reflection upon the organization as much as it was a reflection upon the fact that there was a difference of opinion, a big difference of opinion amongst different municipalities and even members of councils within municipalities throughout DuPage County. And to, I think, Commissioner Newstadt's point, Commissioner Olson's point, in those situations, then it's probably best the organization not take a position rather than take one where you have a divided organization. So I don't think we'll be seeing that again in the future, but it's just unfortunate that it came up when it did. Obviously, advocating on behalf of municipal issues in Springfield is something that we have to be very zealous about continuing to do, and there are constant threats to our management rights, to our revenue sources, unfunded mandates, the list goes on and on. So we need to continue the fight. And I think that we'll be in a pretty good position to assess things at the end of this year, because we'll have had our hands on the steering wheel, the clutch, and the throttle for a whole year. I think we'll have to be in a pretty good shape to find out how the thing works.
Mayor, can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
So, we talked last year about wanting to see how things go, and you've just finished with how great a position we're going to be in to assess things. I'd like it if that was done on a continuous, rolling, kind of ongoing basis, as opposed to hoping that a year from now, as somebody up here remembers some specifics. With all due respect to my colleagues, the DMMC's legislative efforts have largely been unsuccessful, at least over the last 12 months. Most of the issues with which they've taken a stand that were in any way or shape or form controversial, they've been on the losing side. The money that Jeff talks about is certainly good money, but I don't know that I'm real excited about the fact that Dave successfully convinced them to refi a loan they had. And a 2% crack saving thing is great, except we're doing those kinds of things with 58. There are, all of the things that you guys have all spoken about are absolutely true in terms of potential. And I don't think anybody would just discount at face value the idea of collective advocacy. But at some point, that effectiveness is what my question is. Clearly, multiple voices speaking is better than one voice speaking. But that's a little like motherhood and apple pie. Nobody's going to argue with that. But if those collective voices spend your 36 grand and don't actually affect any legislative change, or continue to take positions contrary to those with which we think are best for our residents, then we got to get specific about keeping a scorecard, if you will. That example that Commissioner Olson talked about that everybody's dancing around could be an aberration, or it could be pretty much the same set of heads that did the same thing as they did with the Water Commission issue when we first pulled the plug. But for yourself, it was primarily the same people involved at DMMC. same sets of mayors generally, same administration and staff. So obviously, we can all see where this is going, but I would encourage us all, I'm kind of on behalf of our residents' resources and the expenditure thereof, not the least of which is our staff's time and your time, that we be specific as we go. Keep a scorecard, and don't hope that a year from now, we're all thinking back in the rearview mirror about what we might have thought was kind of cool.
I think it's a good suggestion, and it's one of the platforms, if you will, that I plan to get into in more detail when the time comes. But it is about not only demanding but demonstrating value to every member community and to the county as a whole. And I think that we do need and should report more frequently on what's going on, because some of the things that I see have the most promise have very little to do with advocating for things in Springfield, and have a lot more to do to working with other communities on important things like opportunities for future consolidation that may permit, for example, a community not to have to spend $1 million on a new ladder truck. That's a real issue. That pays for about, that may not happen in the next 6 months, but laying that groundwork so that can happen to some future council is a big deal. Likewise, consolidating the 40-some mosquito abatement districts that we have in DuPage County and being able to work with a joint purchasing contract that saves us real dollars and improves our service for the public health, safety, and welfare of our residents. Those are all real important things, and I think you're right. I think reporting out on those occasionally as progress is made would be not only perfectly fine, but I think not a whole lot to have to expect. So I'll be happy to do that, and I wouldn't mind an occasional reminder.
I'll be sure and do that.
Well, thank you for those comments. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Nay.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the matter passes 5-1. It moves on to item 8B as in boy. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance, Chapter 28 of the Downers Grove Municipal Code, effective June 15, 2014?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments from any members of the public? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Commissioner Neustadt.
Just quickly, thank you, everybody, for all of the hard work. A lot of time and energy has been put into this, and it's great to get to the final point of approval. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Commissioner Rankin?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that although we're approving this tonight, I know we've gotten some correspondence, and we will continue to get correspondence about ideas and changes, and we can always modify things as time passes when we see that things need to be rectified, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I echo those comments. Any other comments from members of the council? I'll just add to what I just said, that not only are these not, I think I famously said before, these are not stone tablets being brought down from Mount Sinai. As we experience the changes in the field, we can and do make revisions, and so that's always a possibility. Picking up on Commissioner Neustadt's comments, I do want to thank everybody who was involved in this process, both the volunteer boards that made recommendations, all the staff members, and the countless hours and presentations that they made, and all the residents who came out and shared comments with us either in person, by email, or otherwise. All that was factored into the mix, and I also want to thank all my colleagues for the lengthy and robust discussion of a lot of different issues. It was a document that was a long time coming in terms of it finally being done. In fact, it might have taken a few more weeks at the end. I think we're probably all better for it. So I'd appreciate everybody's engagement in that process. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Matter passes unanimously, and now that brings us back to item 7E as in Edward, that was on our consent agenda, that has now been moved to our active agenda. Do I have a motion to adopt a resolution approving a final plat of subdivision with exceptions for 5850 Janes Avenue?
So moved.
Second.
Questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Please, sir.
I noticed the response.
Sir, I'm sorry, if you could be so kind as to come to the podium. Folks at home can't hear you otherwise. We can hear you loud and clear, but no one at home will hear you. Thank you. If you could please give us your name and address.
I'm Charles Scouten. I live on 5939 Janes Avenue, at the end of Janes Avenue. I saw the response to our petition to not extend Janes Avenue, and it says it meets 2 comprehensive plan goals. I guess there's another comprehensive plan goal, and that was to minimize or avoid cut-through traffic in estate neighborhoods. And this seems to go exactly contrary to that goal. It's promoting cut-through traffic. It serves no other purpose. It was alleged, well, it says it improves safety by creating another route for emergency personnel. We're about 7-8 blocks from the fire station on Maple, and access from there is in no way improved by extending 59th Street. If the Downers Grove Police are going to come, access is in no way improved by extending 59th Street. So I'm balancing. On the way back in, down Janes, an elderly woman was walking a dog right kind of in the middle of the road. A kid approached it very rapidly on a bike, fortunately didn't come out on, and Lily, our favorite Portuguese water dog of the neighbors, was sleeping in the middle of the cul-de-sac at the end of the street. Really, we're going to have a big increment in safety by enhancing cut-through traffic. And I fail to see any increment in safety by access to emergency personnel. They're on the other side. They'll be coming from the east. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming tonight again. Other questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to this item? Hearing none, questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Commissioner Barnett?
Thank you, Mayor. The annexation agreement we talked about earlier, I certainly am supportive of, and in general, the concept of trying to help assist in our small role of moving forward development here is something I'm in favor of. However, I can't support 2 things that seem to be contingencies of this annexation agreement. One is the extension of 59th Street, Janes. It should come as no surprise to those watching, as well as my colleagues up here, that when there's an opportunity to physically prevent traffic flow through neighborhoods, I'm all in. I think that we have, aside from holes in our streets, the other thing we have is people complain about traffic, and there's no getting around it, and I'd like to force it onto those streets that are, it's picking winners and losers, frankly. That sometimes is not comfortable for us up here, but I really think it's the right way to do it, because I think the winners come out ahead when we protect our neighborhoods from cut-through traffic. In addition, as I understand the likely path forward, now we have limited control because we're not going to annex immediately, but the idea that we would have sort of 2 different sections of street design button up to each other doesn't make a lot of sense, and that we would require a developer as part of this agreement to build a street only so that some other taxing entity could essentially close it. It just doesn't, none of this makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm supportive in general of the development and hope it goes forward, but I'm not going to support the plat of subdivision as it's laid out right now, because it seems to be contingent upon these 59th Street issues, which I think they kind of fly in the face of logic to me. So if there was a way to do this without talking about 59th Street and leaving it as it is, I could be in, but I can't if we're going to compel somebody to build a street that doesn't match and kind of goes to nowhere that somebody else closes, and it just sounds like a bad idea to me, so I'm out.
Thanks, Commissioner. Other questions or comments? I'll just add that I did, at the invitation of the neighborhood, I think Commissioner Olson and others did as well. I just know this because Commissioner Olson said it to me. Spent some time there recently, so I see exactly what the situation is in the neighborhood. And the reality is, everybody wants to have no traffic on their street. And as Commissioner Barnett said, we always have one street wanting to move traffic to the next street, and then 6 months later we have that street before us wanting to move it to the next street, and so on and so forth. So it's a continuing issue. It's a difficult area to navigate to begin with, certainly you look at the map and you can see how it was laid out. It was originally contemplated a street would go through there, so it makes some sense in that regard. But I understand that for the homes that are there, they've enjoyed a quiet dead-end street and they want to keep it that way. But we kind of also have a fiduciary obligation, and that is we have an opportunity here to have, for our future planning, to have a private entity pay for street construction. And to forego that and put it on the backs of the taxpayers generally someday down the road is something that, we may not be here when that happens, but so I can see very easily somebody asking someday, and in a completely different context, the village manager and I had a conversation about something where it was one of those, what were they thinking kind of things. That's kind of the struggle that we're at. It's not that necessarily what the opening the street and creating these issues is something that we invite. And Commissioner Barnett makes a lot of very good points, and that's why this is a difficult one. But it's also this fiduciary obligation about thinking about how we pay for a public improvement that one day is very likely to be within our jurisdiction, and we have an opportunity here to capture that cost through private development. And to not have that happen, I think, is something we have to think very seriously about. I mean, that's the struggle. Otherwise, it would possibly be a different question. I am also troubled by the fact that we seem to have a conflict with the Lowell Township Highway Commission. That is something we obviously, speaking of cooperation and collaboration, something that I would prefer not to see. But I think we have the obligation to follow a plan that we have set forth and the ability to capture that cost. So I'm reluctantly in favor of this. Although I do recognize that we are still recommending that there be a barrier placed there so the traffic cannot go through it until some future date and time. Other questions?
Mayor, I think there might be a comment out in the audience.
Yes, we had public comment before, but if you'd like, sir, please come on up to the podium. We need your name and address, please. Thank you for pointing that out. Sure. Evening.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm splendid. How are you tonight?
Very peaceful, thank you. My name is Jose Jimenez, 5835 James Avenue. Excuse me, I'm nervous. I usually don't speak in big crowds like this. You mentioned that the burden will fall upon the village residents of Downers Grove to pay for that street. If there's a developer paying for the street now, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. If the developer initially proposed a cul-de-sac, it's no cost to the village. Why just leave it a cul-de-sac? Why does the street have to go through?
Because the street going through is consistent with our comprehensive plan.
But your comprehensive plan does not mean cut through traffic. If the developer was willing to pay for a street, have him put the cul-de-sac in initially proposed. Why have it open it up to more traffic in our neighborhood? The developer's willing to pay for it. Let him pay for it. But keep the street closed. It's our neighborhood. We live there. My kids learned how to ride their bikes there. The neighbors did. We were the first ones to move in there with the new homes. There was only 2 kids, my 2 kids. Now there's like 12 kids at the bus stop. It really serves no purpose opening that street. And putting a barrier there, really, does it cosmetically look nice? Does it really look appealing? Cul-de-sac, there's one on the other side. They said that the sidewalks didn't go all the way through. What sidewalks didn't go on the other side, and the developer who developed on the other side paid fee in lieu. So they didn't have to put the sidewalks in. Developer can pay a fee in lieu, no sidewalks, cul-de-sac, everybody's happy. You get a street that you don't have to pay for. That's the way I see it. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But the developer is willing to pay it, have him put a cul-de-sac initially proposed. If the sidewalks don't go all the way through because of the cul-de-sac, fee in lieu, problem solved. You're not going to annex this for another 10 years, I believe, or thereabouts. So that's all I have to say, Mayor.
Thank you. Appreciate you bringing your comments down tonight.
Thank you.
There's one more over there.
Please, come on, folks.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, just a couple additional comments. You have 2 points. One, that the builder is going to supply you with a free street. Whether it's a cul-de-sac or whether it's a street, if annexation does take place, which is very doubtful that the people of that area will ever vote you into Downers Grove. I lived in the Triangle, which is across Hobson Road. That was 25 years ago. It's still unincorporated. Downers Grove tried to annex that area, I believe, 5 times. It was continually voted down. The annexation of the property for the builder, I understand that with the water. I was annexed when I built my house. the annexation was vacated about 2 or 3 years ago. Why, I'm not quite sure, but I think it was a legal issue. So the cost of having a street put in, I understand that's very costly. The builder will build you almost the entire street. The cost of turning a cul-de-sac into a street is minimal. So your 2 points, I think they're much more red herring than anything else. Annexation will undoubtedly not take place since Downers Grove does not have the annexed properties continued on either side. So you don't have us on 3 sides, so you can't annex us by force. It has to be voted in. And having been in an unincorporated area where we tried to put sewers in, we tried to put sidewalks in, this is all Downers Grove, we tried to annex us, we kept voting you down because of the cost. Same thing will happen in this area because the people like the way it is. People who have lived there for 20, 25 years aren't paying $600, $700, $800 in taxes to DuPage County are not going to vote to have their taxes increased by a number of 10, which would happen if they annexed to Downers Grove. So I really don't understand your reasoning making this a cost issue because the cost issue is minimal. The builder is still going to supply you with a free street, and he's still going to connect to the sewer system. The costs will all be there. You'll still be making your money. It's an issue, to me, I think, of keeping the neighborhood the way it is. You comment in here that the residents around 59th Street are in favor of this. I don't see any data supporting that. I don't know where that comment came from. I know that the residents in our neighborhood signed a petition in opposition to this, but I don't understand where the data came that the people along 59th Street, I know the people that live behind me, I know some of the people live on the other side, and they're not supportive of this. So that data to me is, as I see it in this report that I've just read, just a comment that doesn't seem to be supported. That's all I have to say.
Thanks for your comments. I haven't tallied it up. I got an email this morning from someone, I think we all did, supporting it coming through. Other questions or comments from the audience? I'll let the council ask any further questions or comments. Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Neustadt?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Nay.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the matter passes 5-1. That brings us to the end of our active agenda. Brings us to item 9, our first reading or our workshop agenda, when items are presented for discussion, consideration only, and possibly action at a later point in time. I will note that item 9E is in Edward, the discussion of our long-range plan will be conducted in the committee room tonight. So after we get to item 14 and adjourn, we will move into the committee room for our first meeting with respect to the 2014-2015 long-range plan. As is customary, the workshop or first reading items are presented by village staff, so I will turn things over for presentation to Village Manager David Fielman.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. The first item is consideration of a license agreement for a temporary use for a bicycle race. And I will introduce Deputy Village Manager Mike Baker for this item.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I am pleased tonight to present a resolution authorizing an agreement with the Prairie State Cycling Series to conduct a competitive bike race within the downtown area of Downers Grove on Sunday, July 27th. The last time that competitive cycling took place in Downers Grove, it was 2009. Obviously, a lot has changed since then, and this application comes forward under the village's new events facilitation model. I thought I would start out by sharing a little bit of information about the applicant that actually conducts a cycling series that includes 8 destinations around the region, and you can see 7 of them listed here, and the Downers Grove race would be the culminating final event of this 8-day cycling series held during the month of July. So needless to say, this applicant is extremely familiar with conducting these types of events in a number of suburban and urban environments. Here's some basic information about the race itself and the manner in which the village would be supporting it. Again, the race takes place on Sunday, July 27th, with races running from 8:20 in the morning up until 6 p.m. It follows the same figure 8 route that most people are familiar with
that observed or participated in cycling in years past, with a start-finish line at Main and Grove, proceeding through the neighborhoods back onto Main Street and then into the downtown area. There would be access provided into the parking deck while races were occurring through Mokel Drive. And Mokel Drive will temporarily have two-way traffic. And this is why we specifically have required 2 officers at that location to ensure that there's proper safety as vehicles are moving back and forth across Curtis Street. The village staff support for the event will include police personnel stationed at key points throughout the race, EMS bike medics to provide emergency response, and public works staff who will provide setup and removal of barricades and other equipment. All of these costs have been estimated and will be reimbursed by the applicant, consistent with the village's policies. Finally, just some quick information about the timeline that we've gone through in recent months to get to where we are right now. Again, showing the commitment and dedication of this applicant, who has had conversations with the Downtown Management Corporation, receiving enthusiastic support. They submitted their application on April 12th, and we've been able to work in an expedited fashion with them to get it to where we are right now, including discussion by our Community Events Commission. And I know Commissioner Rankin will speak to that in just a moment. And if all goes well, we'll get permit consideration at the meeting on June 3rd, I should say, and provide some time for promotion and coordination of the event taking place on July 27th. Before concluding and turning it over to the council or community for questions, I thought I would give Marco Colbert, who's a representative of the Prairie State Cycling Series, the opportunity to make a few comments.
Thanks, Mike.
Good evening, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. That's great to be here. My name's Mark Colbert. I live in Lincolnshire, Illinois. I'm a partner in the Prairie State Cycling Series. I think it's interesting to note that one of my partners, Tom Schuler, a former pro cyclist, was actually involved in the very first bike race here in Downers Grove. He came to the village council and submitted the initial proposal for that bike race, which, as you know, lasted 23 years. U.S. Pro Professional Criterium Championship was held here for 23 years, successfully, had a great following regionally and nationally. And because of that, I know that this bike race is going to be instantly popular with the bike racers who reside in the Chicago metropolitan area, as well as nationally. The figure 8 race course that you have here is unique. It's a fantastic, from a competitive cyclist point of view, it's a fantastic, exciting race course. It has so many different features. It has the uphill on Lane, it has the downhill on Main, it has the figure 8, and then you're coming around the final corner back onto Main Street, which is always a tricky corner for the racers, and then the uphill finish. So it just has everything that a bike racer wants. I know it's going to be instantly popular among racers. I think also it had been popular with spectators, I believe, in the community. And I think that once the word gets out that we're hopefully bringing the bike race back to town, that the spectators will come too. Well, that will take, I just want to temper our expectations, that will take a little longer, but I do think they're going to come. I think an event like this, my group believes in cycling, we love cycling, and we think this is going to have a great economic impact on the community. You may know that in 2005, the village commissioned an economic impact statement for the bike races that were going on in that year, and that report showed a very favorable economic impact on the village. So I'll just finish up by saying Mike has mentioned that we got some real good community support. We've met with Linda Kunze at Downtown Downers Grove. We met with Lisa Wenzel at the Economic Development Corp. Bill Chalberg of the Downers Grove Bicycle Club is enthusiastic, and in fact the club is going to provide volunteers this year. We have letter of support from those groups, and in fact Lisa Wenzel has already offered us some sponsorship. So, as Mike said, we're not here to request any funding from the village. In fact, we fund this event through two sources of revenue, sponsorships and the race fees that the cyclists pay. But I'm going to finish by saying that there are some excellent sponsorship benefits available through this bike race, and I will be submitting marketing benefits that the village might be interested in. So separately from this application, I'm going to send Mike a pitch, a sponsorship pitch, and maybe you might be interested in taking that up. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation. Very exciting. Anything further from presentation standpoint?
That concludes the presentation.
All right, thank you. Just wanted to be sure I didn't cut anyone off. Any questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to the proposed return of the bike race? Questions or comments from the council? Commissioner Rankin?
The Community Events Commission considered this at our May 8th meeting and enthusiastically supported it. There's some members that had been on the commission for a long time and they recall the good old days of the Criterion, so glad to support it. I just wanted to mention that they are looking for volunteers. It creates a lot of needs of people to be in places to help manage that, and as you mentioned, sponsorship. It'll bring 400 racers to Downers Grove and 1,000 to 2,000 spectators, so it should be a real win for Downers Grove, and I'm excited to see it. And they will have a kids bike race, which is really neat. I know my boys will be all over that. They're very competitive, so I think that's a real neat aspect of the race. Excuse me. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you. Other questions or comments? I just want to add, I'm very excited to see the bike race come back to Downers Grove. As a distant predecessor of Commissioner Rankin on the Community Events Commission back when the race was at its peak. The one thing I've heard over the years when people will talk about, boy, Downers Grove is doing great things, Downers Grove is doing this, congratulations on that, congratulations on that. The one thing I don't like is how do we get that bike race back? That's the one thing I hear probably more than anything else. So this is terrific news. Very excited about this, and do hope that it takes solid root back in our community where it belongs. But I'm not biased or anything. Any other questions or comments? Next item, please.
The next item is consideration of a bid for a new road salt storage facility, also known as a salt dome. Here to present information on this item is our Public Works Director, Nan Newland.
Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. I know in the middle of a rainstorm, it's strange to be talking about building a new salt dome, but we have been and continue to be in plans for this winter's snow already. A motion is requested to award a contract for the road salt storage facility construction to Dome Corporation of North America of Saginaw, Michigan, in the amount of $462,780. The scope of the project includes the construction of a 6,700-ton capacity road salt storage facility at the Public Works facility at 5101 Walnut Avenue, and the demolition of the existing 2,500-ton capacity salt dome on that site. This represents an increase of 250% increase in the salt storage capacity that the village has, and gives us the ability to store 150% of the average amount of salt purchased annually. Expanding the existing salt dome will eliminate salt deliveries made during snow season in all but the most severe winter events and reduce future road salt costs. This will allow us to be able to purchase all of the salt we would anticipate to be able to use by October of each year, instead of how we currently do it, which was we start with a full salt dome, use the salt we have, and then rely on getting purchases and restocking that throughout the winter, which can be problematic, like we had this winter when the rivers froze and barge traffic wasn't able to reach the salt resupplies. So this will give us more reliability in our service and our delivery of salt. A call for bids was issued and 2 bids were received. Dome Corporation of North America was the low bidder, and we are recommending the award of an alternate bid, which included the installation of interior and exterior lighting, which will make the facility safer for our workers throughout the winter. They have satisfactorily completed similar projects for local communities, including Lombard, Hoffman Estates, and Franklin Park, as well as McHenry County and Lake County. And we recommend award of this contract to Dome Corporation of North America, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
And before we go into that, I'll also introduce the next item, item C, which is a companion item. The proposed salt dome and frankly our existing salt dome and some of our parking that serves the Public Works facility is actually located on land owned by the Downers Grove Sanitary District, a separate government with a separate appointed board. We've been leasing that land since the construction of the Public Works facility in 1996. What we're proposing here are some adjustments to that existing lease. An extension of that lease with a few amendments would allow us to continue to operate the new salt dome on this property, and it specifies that the lease would terminate only under certain regulatory events caused by environmental protection agencies. We did also have some cleanup language on how we're handling stormwater fees that are attributable to us putting impervious pavement on sanitary district property, and we're reflecting that in the lease. So these items go together, the construction of a new salt dome on property already leased by the village, owned by the sanitary district. Thanks. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the audience? Questions or comments from the village council? Hearing none. Next item. That was a twofer.
That next item is consideration of a resolution authorizing an incentive agreement with CompuSystems. Here to present this item tonight is the president of the Downers Grove Economic Development Corporation, Michael Casa.
Good evening, Mr. Casa.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. The attraction and retention of Class A office tenants in Downers Grove is an important part of our local economy. Corporate headquarters, as well as division and regional headquarters, provide jobs and customers, jobs as well as customers for our restaurants and our hotels and our shops. Downers Grove is one of the premier locations in the Chicago area for headquarters projects. The EDC works very closely with site consultants and real estate brokers to ensure that we have an opportunity to land many of these tenants. But we have lots of competition, not only within DuPage County, but within the western suburbs and in the city of Chicago. The segment of the regional real estate market that has been slowest to recover from the recession is the suburban office market, where vacancy rates still hover above 20% in the region. But again, it's a very important part of our local economy. It's one of our strengths of our local economy. Just to give you an example of how important we take this, this is the State of Illinois' official economic development guide. They give this to every client. They give this to any company that's interested in coming to Illinois. They display it at trade shows. And we purchased one of the key ads spots in the guide opposite the table of contents. It's a full-page ad promoting Downers Grove as a location for corporate office projects. We've been fortunate to land several Class A headquarters projects in recent months, including Sanford LP, the maker of Sharpie and Papermate, which is moving its headquarters to 3500 Lacey Road, also known as Esplanade 2. Another quality company that has made Downers Grove its top choice is CompuSystems Incorporated. CompuSystems will be moving its corporate headquarters from Broadview, Illinois to Downers Grove. The company will locate its office at 2651 Warrenville Road, Suite 400, which is one of the Corridors buildings. The space is currently vacant. Since 1976, CompuSystems has been a leader in providing registration, data management, and lead retrieval services to the exposition industry. CompuSystems is a privately held company that has more than 100 clients representing nearly 200 trade shows annually. The economic incentive agreement that we're recommending before you has the following terms. CompuSystems shall move their corporate headquarters to Downers Grove. The company shall comply with all village ordinances and applicable laws and shall diligently pursue obtaining all required permits for the construction of their lease space. CompuSystems shall begin its corporate operations on the property by December 1st, 2014. The company shall continue operations at the property for a minimum of 5 years. If CompuSystems fails to do so, it agrees to pay the village the total amount of the fee waiver. And finally, the Village of Downers Grove agrees to waive 50% of permit fees associated with the initial build-out of the project and that fee waiver is estimated to be up to $15,000. The attraction of corporate headquarters projects in Downers Grove, as I've said, is a priority for the EDC, and we strongly support passage of this economic development agreement. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Casa. While you're there, any questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to this item? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? It's terrific news. Bringing another high-quality corporate headquarters to Downers Grove. Keep them coming. We'd love to see this and appreciate all the work that went into it, both at the EDC and the staff level.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Dave Fieldman and Ensign Petrarca for their help and their work on this project. And also wanted to follow up on the earlier presentation. We are one of the paid sponsors for the Prairie State bike event. I think we're the gold sponsor level, and we look forward to supporting that event too.
Terrific.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to welcoming CompuSystems to Downers Grove.
That ends our first reading tonight until we adjourn into the committee room for a long-range planning discussion, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, very good. And we will skip item 9E as in Edward, come back to that after our adjournment. Brings us to the mayor's report, item 10. I have no report at this point in time.
About our most recent designation, Mr. Mayor. Number 2 most awesomest town in the world.
Surprised somebody didn't steal that from me much earlier. That's why I didn't even have it written down, but now that you've mentioned most awesomeness. It's funny because there were people that approached me about this before I'd even heard about it. The Village of Downers Grove was, if you haven't already seen it, received a ranking from livability.com as the #2 community in the entire country with respect to quality of life and places to raise kids, which is obviously terrific. So not only just are we in the top 10 livable cities for kids, but our #2, the only person that beat us out was Boise, Idaho. With all due respect to Boise, Idaho, I'm not thinking that's a close choice that someone's making. If you're in the Midwest, I think you're probably coming here. Boise, Idaho is another world. Now I'm going to get letters and emails from Boise, Idaho. That's okay. Coming on the heels of some other recognitions, such as Forbes magazine recognizing us as one of the friendliest communities to live in, as well as top place to retire, an exciting place to be, in a top 10 downtown. I won't throw him under the bus, but a mayor of another town said to me this morning, would you save a few awards for the rest of us? So this is really neat, and I just want to add, see, now you got me rolling, I'm going to keep going here. I want to add that it's not just the Village Downers Grove organization that makes it possible. I think that accolades are due to our outstanding parks, our schools, our not-for-profits, our business community, and our residents at large that all make this such a terrific community, and all of us working together is what makes this these kind of recognitions and accolades possible. They all look at different factors, and it's nice to hear it. It's nice to hear the morning talk shows talking about Downers Grove is a great place to live, and people can debate it as to whether or not it's Boise, Idaho, or whatnot. But great news, and thanks for prompting me to mention it. So now I really have no further report. That brings us to item 11, Village Manager's Report. Mr. Fieldman?
No report tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 12, Ms. Petrarca, Attorney's Report?
No report, Mayor.
No
Thank you.
report. Item 13, lucky 13, council member new business. Any members of the Village Council have any items of new business they would like to present to the rest of the council tonight? Hearing none, that brings us to item 14. We are going to adjourn into the committee room for our long-range planning discussion. Do I have a motion to do so adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. We are adjourned into the next room. Please stay tuned. But for those of you watching now, thank you and good night. All right, welcome back, everyone. We are reconvened for the long-range plan discussion for 2014-2015. This is the first of several meetings.
It is.
That will take place on this topic. So disregard the horrendous weather outside and come with us on a journey through the long-range plan. Mr. Fieldman.
Welcome to the long-range plan for this year. The village, of course, has a long history of strategic and financial planning It's served us well. We've achieved many financial sustainability goals. We've achieved many strategic goals. In 2013, we combined long-range financial planning with strategic planning so that we're both focused on outcomes, strategic, and financial, which is resource allocation driven. We now identify issues affecting the village now that may also affect us in the future. We develop strategies to address those issues over the long haul. This planning document guides our annual budget preparation, but we shouldn't overlook that it actually also guides daily operations, and staff refers to it on a regular basis. It also includes action items over a 2-year period. What we're doing here is actually an update to the 2013-2015 plan, and we have 3 objectives. Review the 3 key issues that are included in the current plan, see how we're doing on those. Identify and address new trends and issues that affect the future of the village. And the third is to review and modify, if necessary, the high and medium priority action items included in the current plan. As the mayor mentioned, we have a series of meetings planned over the summer. Here is the schedule. Here we are at May 20th. We have 1 meeting per month planned through August to address these issues. For tonight, we want to start with an overview of the current 2013 to 2015 long-range plan. The plan contains 5 goals. These goals that you see here on the screen have remained largely unchanged over the past several years. In fact, they have served us very well. We have achieved significant results supporting all of these goals. The results are many, really too many to go through here tonight. The best place to get an idea of where and how we've achieved these goals is to go back and review our annual reports, really starting in 2010. And if you read them in succession, they're quick reads, you get a great story of measurable items that we've achieved pursuant to these goals. The current plan has identified 3 key issues with strategies to address them. These are the ones that we talked about last year, and tonight we want to provide an update on all 3 of these items: the infrastructure and maintenance gap, facilities planning and sustainability, and the potential reduction of state shared revenues. You remember from last year we had an annual maintenance gap where revenues would not reach the expenses required to properly maintain our infrastructure systems, particularly our street system. We were about $1.2 million per year short. We did identify a strategy for addressing that, and that would be to take existing revenues we currently have in place in the form of home rule sales tax and property tax that were originally targeted for the retirement of a bond issuance and stormwater-related expenses, move those over to pledge them to street maintenance and other infrastructure maintenance gaps. So this is a $1.2 million gap with a $1.2 million solution. You will see that shift in existing revenues reflected in the 2015 budget, so we are on target to addressing this issue. The second issue is facilities sustainability. This is actually an action item we're currently working on. The council had a meeting on this just a few weeks ago. The issue here is our police station and village hall require major renovations. Council is currently pursuing 2 options. We will meet again in the coming months, and by August we expect to have council direction on this high priority action item. The third key issue identified in the current plan that we talked about last year is the potential reduction in state shared revenues, primarily income tax. This is often also referred to as LGDF, Local Government Distributive Fund, that was discussed earlier in the council meeting portion of tonight. There is a risk that the state General Assembly may take actions that could reduce the amount of money coming to not only our municipality but all municipalities. The actions we put in place to address this potential loss of revenue are to continue to maintain substantial reserves and continue to monitor state actions while working to protect municipal revenues. In the event that we have a significant loss in revenue, we would engage in a prioritization discussion and potential restructuring effort similar to that of what we have done in 2010 when we experienced the impact of the Great Recession. The key here is to position ourselves well to be able to be sustainable while we go about any prioritization and restructuring effort. And you'll hear later tonight and see that we are very well positioned to address any of these issues in the short run, allowing us time to restructure if necessary. Before I go on to the identification of key issues and solutions for this round of planning in the update, does the council have any questions about the three key issues and actions to date?
No, sir.
What do you, how do you see this procedurally? You're just going to kind of roll through this tonight, and then we'll start formulating topics with which we might discuss. I'm trying to not pull the same thing as the zoning thing and screw this up by waiting till the end.
Yeah. Yes. Procedurally, you know what, that's probably a good transition into the very next slide.
Right, because we're focusing on certain issues tonight, such as...
So we have 4 meetings planned. Tonight, what we want to do is go through some issues related to the general fund revenues and our fund balance, and really set up for a discussion at the next meeting about the risk fund and some strategies and issues we have there, moving on to downtown TIF discussion in the same evening. The risk fund discussion, downtown TIF discussion would happen at the June meeting. And Commissioner, to your point, I think that would be a good point to start a discussion about specific solutions to the issues we've identified. Those 3 issues are all related, and you'll see as I go through the slides tonight, they relate to how to best put our money to work, the fund balance we've accumulated in the general fund. In the July meeting, we'll take a look at stormwater utility revenue needs. What we'll do is go through, take a look at our revenues, our expenses, and make sure we're all on the same page as our plan for adjustments to stormwater utility fees going forward. So we expect that to be a very interactive meeting among the council looking for direction on a plan. And then the last meeting in August would be an update to any of our action items for the balance of this makeup of the current council. So this meeting is probably more informational. The June meeting would be participative, looking for council direction on use of fund balance in the general fund. The next meeting would be participative, looking for direction on setting utility rates. And certainly August would be participative, looking for direction on our action items. The first issue concerns the general fund. The village has existing financial needs in many areas, and we've been talking about them for several years. We have demonstrated these needs, we've quantified these needs in past long-range planning efforts, and we're going to do it again in this long-range planning session. We have some great news, though. The performance of our general fund, which is our main operating fund, over the past few years has been absolutely exceptional. Because of this exceptional performance, we have accumulated a pretty large fund balance that exceeds our village's fund balance policy. This graph really does show it all, Mayor, as you were saying as we entered the room. This is a graph showing revenues and expenses in the general fund from 2007 through 2013. Revenues are shown on the blue line. Expenses are shown on the orange or red line. What this graph shows you is that revenues have exceeded expenses every year since 2010. Revenues are performing better than our annual budget projections, and expenses have been controlled. During this time, while that blue line of revenues is above the red line of expenses, our fund balance, the amount of money we have in our operating fund, has grown from $15.4 million in 2009 to over $21 million now. We want to take a closer look at general fund revenues since 2009. And that's what this graph shows, and really the best place to get a detailed understanding is in the printed copies or the version online if you have a tablet or a computer. What this series of stacked bar graphs shows is that total revenues in the general fund have increased by 12% since 2009. 12% since 2009, an average increase of 2.9% per year. The key drivers of this revenue performance are income tax, sales tax revenue, and building permit revenue. So those are the 3 key drivers: income tax, sales tax, and building permit revenue. This is a graph taking a closer look at general fund expenses. We have some great news on this front. Expenses have increased by only 5.92% in total since 2009. That's an average increase of less than 1.5% per year. I should note that stormwater expenses were shifted to another fund, the Stormwater Fund, in 2013, which accounts for some of the expense control. That was really more of a shift than a reduction. However, we have done a great job of controlling expenses. You look at the three components of this bar graph. The blue section at the bottom represents salary and wages, and then the yellowish section in the middle is pension expenses, and the top section is all other expenses in the general fund. What we're saying here is personnel expenses have increased at a rate of about 2.5% a year. Salary and wages, the biggest component of that, have increased at only 2.9% in the past 4 years, less than 1% a year. Personnel expenses of salaries and wages have increased at less than 1% a year. A lot of this has to do with our staffing reductions, which took place in 2010, and we continued to control staffing levels. I do want to point out on this graph that pension expenses during this time have increased 44.3%. 44.3%, an average of 11% per year. Look at the stark contrast. You remember that the pension expenses largely are determined by benefit levels controlled by the state, and our inputs are really limited to how many people we employ and what we pay them. So the areas we control directly, we have a great story of cost containment, cost control. The pension area, you can see that increase is far outpacing other controllable expenses here at the village. I want to talk a little bit about our bond rating and how it relates to our policy discussion. A bond rating is a very strong measure of an organization's overall financial condition and performance. The village has achieved the highest bond rating possible, AAA, as rated by Standards & Poor's. The importance of this great bond rating is that this rating allows us to borrow money at a lower cost, which means we put more of our money to work directly into infrastructure projects for which we issue bonds. More of our money goes directly into the actual infrastructure than into interest payments. This rating was the product of exceptional municipal management and financial stewardship, and the bullet points on the screen were taken right out of the S&P report reflecting those two ideas. Why do we mention this? Obviously, with those benefits of a AAA rating, the village should strive to maintain that AAA bond rating. But at the same time, we should try to make sure that we are maximizing the value and utility of the money we have in our fund balance. Put that money to work. So here, in a nutshell, really, is our issue. When you read the S&P report in some detail, that report suggests that we should keep about $16.6 million in our fund balance to be in a position to keep that AAA rating. So about $16.6 million should be kept there. $20.4 million is available now in our general fund balance. That means that we have $3.8 million available for those existing quantified and demonstrated needs elsewhere in the village. So the idea is keep enough money in there to maintain the AAA rating and the benefits that come with it, and then anything above that, let's put it to work for us in areas that we have needs. We have some recommendations as to how we could use some of this money. The first recommendation actually has a number in it, and that is we should transfer $1.9 million to the transportation fund. We recommend that this be transferred because we have an accumulated deficit in this fund that was the product of multiple years of operating deficits for the Grove Commuter Shuttle. We are no longer increasing the accumulated deficit because of partnerships and agreements we have with PACE. We are operating at a break even or better. But when you read that S&P report in our bond rating, because we have that negative accumulated deficit, they've already counted that money against us as not available and not calculated towards that bond rating. This suggests that we should go ahead and make that transfer in its entirety to eliminate that accumulated deficit. You'll see next here on the slide that we have some blanks here that we would like the council and the community to help us fill out as part of long-range planning this year. We think we should keep some amount, perhaps above that 16.6 million, in the general fund balance or reserves to be positioned to address any reduction in state shared revenues. We also think that we should transfer some money to address issues in the risk fund and transfer some of that money potentially to address some downtown TIF debt service payments. It's important to note at the next meeting, we will go through in some detail the issues that we face in risk management and those cost issues and downtown TIF. So at the end of the next presentation by staff at the next meeting, you should be in a position to weigh in on what we should do and how we should distribute those funds. And that's what this slide entails. The next step is that discussion. At the end of that meeting, I see a discussion amongst us how to best allocate $1.9 million of fund balance. With that, Mayor, we're happy to answer any comments, questions. We have a lot of the staff that put this long-range plan presentation together here with us tonight.
I'll give the audience a chance to collect their thoughts and ask members of the council if they have any questions or comments on what's been presented thus far, underscoring the sequencing that was described earlier. And you're really looking for more input in terms of answers to some of the questions that have been posed, as well as any other suggestions in terms of what we might be doing in this area at the next meeting?
Correct.
But not to foreclose anyone from bringing up anything now, I will remind everyone, so we don't end up at the end where we have a big conversation, sort of a balloon payment, like if something does come up, there's no reason why it can't be stated now, and then we'll know it's on the table for next time, even if that's when the discussion takes place. So with that introduction, any questions or comments from the council at this point in time?
Yeah.
I do, so go ahead.
You can start if you
No,
like.
go ahead, all for you. Go for it.
I'd like us to try and think about two things and try and develop some planning for a couple things. I guess I want to change that for the purposes of this consideration of this group and the discussion tonight and on the 17th. I'd like us to take that 1.9 million transportation fund and make that a blank line like the others, because that that $1.9 million, it's sort of already out there. It's sort of already discounted, certainly as an internal debt because of the way we do our fund accounting. But it need not necessarily be retired. We have a system in place for what, a year and a half, 2 years, trying to deal with interest and ship that away because it's a debt to ourselves. And we all bring different experiences to the group, but cash flow is one that always makes me nervous. And I see other needs. I think in my mind, some of the other elements on that list are bigger priorities to me. The other thing that I'd like us to do is try and think about developing a plan that takes, I don't know, a decade. But moves us to a position where if we go back to, this chart, I'd like us to get to the point where, and I'm going to use real generic terms, but it's a long planning thing, not a flip of a switch thing, but where we saw LGDF as almost gravy, if you will. We weren't quite so heavily dependent on it. I mean, we're pretty heavily dependent on it right now. And if you look at the idea of trying to tie expenses and revenues together, these things, not that sales tax is any more predictable, but at least it's, at least it's a little bit more under control than LGDF in particular. These things, going back to the expense line, I think some of you know I was asking some questions about trying to get behind some of the details behind, in particular, the $32 million of the $40 million for round numbers is stuff that the only way you change it is by either changing service levels or changing state law. And we need to have those conversations continually about what service levels are appropriate. But to Dave's point earlier, our numbers look as good as they do and our performance looks as good as it does by adjustments in personnel. So when we look at whatever $5 million out of the number is of LGDF, which is at risk, we know it's in play. So let's, when was it, 69? When was it? Did they start? 70? So, you know, for the first 125 years, the village operated without LGDF. And I'd just like us to be a little less dependent on them. And that's not a short conversation. I mean, I'm not sitting here tonight acting like I've got some suggestions exactly how we do that, but I think we need to sort of identify that as a goal and start keeping that in the conversation for whatever other decisions we're making. You know, does that sort of further the goal of reducing our reliance on LGDF, or does it cement the need? Because that's a big deal. Not everybody probably shares the same, you know, attachment to some of the tough decisions that were made, but they were not any fun. And I want to stay way the heck away from having to make them again. And we're talking about under almost, I think, any reasonable scenario incurring fairly hefty amount of additional debt from our facilities needs sometime in the pretty near future. And so I just want to be working towards getting off of the state if we can. We can't today, but working towards it. I'd like to have this kind of goal that we're always talking about. And I'm sorry I don't have that slide in front of me, but those four groups or those four possible uses to try and bring some of that general fund back down to the recommended range. Those are good, but I sort of encourage colleagues to think between now and next week about whether there's anything else that ought to be, from our vantage point or 7 vantage points, if there's anything else that ought to be considered up there.
Commissioner, did I capture this right? Consider a long-term plan to reduce reliance on state shared revenues, align expenses with revenues while maintaining or enhancing service levels. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I would have taken sort of the last thing off there from while forward, just remove that. I think we need to have a pretty regular discussion about what service levels are, and I don't know that I'm comfortable saying maintain and enhance all the time.
Okay.
It's, you know, not a good analogy, but needs of the community change too. And so, this is a horrible analogy, but it's the one popping into my head as I'm trying to figure out how to get hold of my kids. But, you know, there's a lot of people not even putting in landlines anymore. So needs and expectations of the market change too. And so if we hold on to maintain and enhance, you know, maintain, maybe not, depends on sort of what the issue is. I don't want to put that idea into stone on anything. We do it a lot. We say it all over the place, maintain and enhance, maintain and enhance. Yeah, but maybe not, maybe dump. Dump and enhance something else maybe. Let's not get too locked into that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Other questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions?
I have a question. How much have we chipped away at that transportation fund deficit with the current plan?
I believe it's a couple $100,000 over the last 2 years.
Just a little under 100.
About 100.
Thank you.
It's still a pretty low interest rate environment.
Right.
Other questions? Waving pens? I can't tell if that's a hand.
No, I'm kind of waving the pen, contemplating.
All right.
Good work.
I think I tend to agree on the transportation fund issue, because, I mean, the reality is, and no disrespect to our accountants in the room, that's kind of an accounting issue. It's more of a true deficit, and we need to remind ourselves of that. Yes, it's something we'd like just to not have on our books anymore, but it is sort of a debt to ourselves. It's like borrowing against your variable whole life policy. It's your own money that you've kind of borrowed out. And if we have more pressing needs, I'd at least stay open to that. I think that's a valid point. Although we do have a plan in place for ultimately eliminating that now. Now the question is whether we kick it up a notch when we can. Sort of like making that extra mortgage payment every year goes a long way. So I don't want to say no, but maybe we don't need to strike it out completely. I do think we need to have a plan for greatly reducing our reliance upon LGDF. I mean, there's at least, what, 2 bills pending right now? They're threatening to take away good chunks of it. and we're not going to get it off, we're not going to get off of it anytime soon, but it's also something to strive for. I want to be careful that we don't suggest that we don't need it anymore, and therefore just begging for the inevitable outcome, because that's not the case, and we won't go back to the historic basis for it and why it's an entitlement for municipalities as a trade-off back in the 1970s. But that is, I think that is something worth doing. And however we word it, whether it's aligning expenses with revenues, some concept of aligning expenses with revenues and community expectations is probably what you're getting at. It's not always maintaining and enhancing, but we should always be realigning what services we provide to what the environment is and what the expectations of the electorate are. Constituents. It's a broader pool than electorate. And now this is way for the future, but just because I'm going to put it on the table when the time comes, is we need to make some decision about what we're doing with the Community Grants Commission and the Community Grants Program. We eliminated the dollars, but we still have the commission and the infrastructure hanging around.
You know, Mayor,
If that's not going to be, if that's not something that's going to be in alignment with the expectations of the community, then I think we ought to make that decision, not leave it laying around like a trilobite fossil.
I don't know how you worded it, but you said, you know, I'm sorry, I forgot exactly, but it struck a chord with me about dealing with the transportation fund and like, you know, if we have a little extra money, should we pay down the mortgage early kind of a thing? And that's what you said it better than I did, even though I remembered it. That's what I was trying to encourage everybody is, the question, there's some suggested possible uses here, but the question will probably come and go from year to year. You know, when we have a situation where we're in this condition, what do we want to make a policy on how we do with it, or do we want to always have sort of an open-ended question? I suspect probably it's the latter, but the idea that money is, it's every dollar we take, as we know, is way more than spoken for. And so that's just reality. So when we're talking about what can we use it for, to give you just an example, is if you said you were going to use it to bolster the downtown TIF, well, what you also might be saying then is your community expectations about redevelopment pace and quality, you were putting yourself in a better condition to meet those needs, for instance. That might be a better use than an accounting cleanup on a transportation fund. So those are the kinds of things that are in my head about that transportation fund, and to the broader point of what might we do with it to further the community's expectations beyond just that.
Right, and this goes to your other question about inviting other thoughts and comments, if not today, then at the next meeting. Are there other things that we haven't been able to kickstart that are new expectations in alignment with the community that we might have an opportunity to kickstart something we haven't been able to do before? I don't know, but I think that's a fair question. The only issue on the transportation fund is if it's really an accounting issue, that we do have a plan in place, and whether we accelerate the plan to eliminate that or not is the question. If it's doing some real harm, and I'm going to channel Commissioner Durkin here for a moment, if it's doing any real harm to our bond rating, then that obviously would be a goal we want to, that is something we want to maintain and enhance, clearly.
Obviously, we achieved the AAA with this situation.
Right, well, I think that was what Commissioner Barnett was saying, is that notwithstanding that, we still were able to achieve it, but if it were come to a situation where it posed a threat to that, that might be a different analysis. But I think, I'm intrigued by I'll stop talking in a second. I'm intrigued by the concept of having default guidelines, are probably a poor choice of words, but you know, it's sort of what you do at the end of the year. You true up your household budget, and if you have some funds left, you have 3 or 4 things that you would sort of do with that money unless there was something else. So if you had the money, you'd make an extra payment on the mortgage, putting yourself that much further ahead down the road. But that assumes that the furnace didn't go bad on you, or something else that would take priority. Kind of depends.
Now, as I was wiggling my pen, I was formulating exactly one of the things you started talking about, is what is the incremental benefit in terms of our AAA rating to eliminating the $1.9 million transportation fund, and how does that relate to, well, could we take a bigger chunk out of the risk fund or the downtown TIF, and what is the benefit of that? So obviously, we're not going to call Standard & Poor's up and say, hey, what's going on? But
if you guys could give us an idea of which ends up benefiting the AAA rating more, that would be a very helpful piece of information.
Is it a fair assumption that, I probably should know this from having read it, but I read them and then I pop them out of my head. The downtown TIF in particular, because of the dent that it carries, or that it's servicing, it plays a role in that credit rating.
Yes, it does.
It's debt burden that at least at this point is marginally covered.
Right, and the key thing you're going to hear next week when Mike presents, or next month when Mike presents that, is how big of an issue is it and what backs it. And one of the reasons that it's not negatively affecting us here is that it's a general obligation bond, which means that if we have the capacity and could tax on the property tax levy for it. But yes, you were absolutely correct. It's already considered, that issue's documented. When the rating agencies look at us, they look at future debt service payments that are on the books already. Yes, already considered.
Can I just throw a heads up to Mike when he talks about the downtown debt service, and I'm still hung up on this notion that is there a way to rework that? You know, we're not just looking at making an extra payment on it, but is there a way to refinance or extend? Are there other options that we can explore that don't have a cost element to them that will improve that situation, maybe capture a better timeline in terms of economic development in the town? I know there's all kinds of obstacles to that, but I don't want to give up exploring that.
And I think we meet with our financial advisor tomorrow.
All right.
On that very issue. So.
And likewise on the risk fund too. I know we do a lot of terrific things, and we've done a lot of things over the last 10 years to really improve the risk part of the risk fund. But again, when we get to it, I'd like to hear more about not just how do we put more money into it, but how do we make that pot smaller necessarily so we don't have to fill it up so much.
To that point, too, about the TIF fund and how it plays into the facilities planning and what incremental change there may be with this property, too. How does that play into that conversation going into the future of the debt service of the existing TIF? I know I used incremental on purpose because it's small, but if that plays into some potential option with the financial guys, that adding a new increment to the tax increment financing district, does that allow us to rearrange in a different way, and then does that play into the decision for the facility setup of what we may want to look at for the options?
Concept we talked about in facilities planning and with more meat on the bone really there. Yes, we'll be ready to talk about that next month as well.
Thinking about the risk fund as well, I'd be interested to know how much of what we're looking at in the risk fund is actually that we have a liquidated amount, how much of it is cash.
We'll have all that information. Actually, we'll have all that information in about 2 weeks. We'll have every one of these questions framed up, answered, and all the trend lines ready to go.
Other preliminary comments? Heads up to
I
you.
was more just a listener than, didn't really have comments prepared and stuff.
No need. Just want to make sure everybody had the opportunity. Is there more to present?
No, we just wanted to go through a frame-up of what you can expect and celebrate some of the great news and performance in our general fund.
Did you just say celebrate great news?
I did.
You teed that up for me, because we've been doing a lot of that, but not as much as we should. I think this village, and tonight, is another great example. Mayor Kelly told us about being the second best community in the world for kids, but...
Awesomeness.
Yeah.
Second most awesome.
Wasn't it?
Second most awesomeness.
I
thought there was a super.
Dawn, I think you spell that correctly, maybe?
You're not at the spelling bee anymore.
Where we are right now compared to where we were when I was first brought into this council, and even in the 5 years ago, or whatever you want to call it, however many years ago, the way and the path that we're taking and the long-range planning that we're undertaking is so much different from where we were before. And it allows us to have these conversations that celebrate the good news, but also allow us to make good policy decisions that have been working. We wouldn't be at this position had the previous long-range planning sessions been put into place, acted upon, and then carried through. So, it is a little bit of a rah-rah moment, but I think we need to do that so everybody realizes that these are important. While this one seemed a little bit more informational, it's very important that these are the building blocks of the next step, and the next step after that, and the next meeting after that, because it all goes together. And it's now carried over for how many years? And that's a testament to the folks that are here at 801 every day, following through with the policies that we have designed and designated for our community. So these are great meetings. I'm really happy to be here and be part of them, because it allows us to do, as Bob said, come up with a plan long-term that'll outlive probably most of us, but to have a discussion now that can be carried through with our professional staff into the future. Those are really, really important conversations to have that will continue to allow Downers Grove to thrive and be a great community that it is and win all these wonderful awards. Because if we didn't have, I'm not going to say the long-range plan got us the second awesomest community in the world, but it allowed us as a village, one part of the community, to position ourselves in a way that is appropriate to our community members and, in this case, to our kids. So think about that. What we're doing here is planning for the future for hopefully the kids of this town that are going to want to come back here and live or stay like I did. So, sorry, that was a little bit of a off-topic run at some good news, but
No,
sometimes we need that.
You really hit on a different issue, and that's goes back to community expectations and alignment with them. Is what are the metrics that we're trying to achieve? Is it that bar chart, or is it low crime rate, good parks, high, well-educated, good school system and things like that? People liking their services. One of the factors was the pedestrian and bikeway and the green awards and things like that. I mean, what is it that you're trying to achieve? That's where it gets back to what the community alignment with community expectations are. It's not lines in a graph. It's what is it you're trying to achieve, and the long-range plan is a tool to get to those metrics that you're trying to measure your awesomeness against. And on that note, while everyone's contemplating other great new words, any questions from our two members of the audience? Dr. Goodman?
I had a couple questions. I was wondering, how does the target balance 38% of expenses that Standard & Poor's is looking at compare with our current council policy about fund balances?
They're almost identical.
And how, originally, a couple years ago, there was a discussion about whether we wanted to change the way we figured the fund balance. I wondered how that discussion was going.
Well, we found that our current policy is a cash balance policy, and it subtracts this and adds this and does all these great things, and it makes a lot of sense to financially minded people. Then a couple years ago, we came up with a rule of thumb that we thought was close to our policy, and we said 40% of expenses would be a good fund balance policy, and then lo and behold, S&P comes out and says 38.8% or something like that. So all of those indicators are in the same ballpark. And so really this sort of rule of thumb plus our standardized cash balance policy has served us well, and unless the council would like to change it or codify it or modify it, we're quite happy with S&P or 40% or our current official policy.
So do you still do this juggling of cash at the end of the year to figure out what your fund balance is, or do you actually use the fund balance at the end of the year?
Judy and her team actually calculates the cash balance to look at our cash balance policy, and then people like me or Mike do the quick fund balance to expenses, and we come at it from both ways.
And but Standard & Poor's analysis is based on what you and Mike do, the fund balance.
It's a little closer to the fund balance approach than the cash balance approach, but they are so interrelated. They both serve a purpose, and they both serve us well.
It makes it kind of complex for people outside of the village government to understand what you're doing, though.
Yeah, that's why I like the 40% of annual expenses.
I was hoping that when you present these things in public, you would decide on one of them, and the cash balance with all the subtractions of numbers that have a little bit of judgment associated with them didn't seem as productive to me as the fund balance analysis. So I'm hoping the village is moving in that direction for its public display at any rate, and maybe the policy could move in that direction too. My other question is about participation of people like me and maybe some others who would want to contribute discussions, again, particularly on this issue of aligning the village services and the village residents' expectations. It's great that we have elected representatives and you're going to be the final deciders about this, but I'm hoping that there's going to be in these series of meetings some opportunity for people to talk about particularly some of the action items where you had eliminated various services that people had previously looked to the village for. And now that you're beginning to look at a good income and surplus over the expenses because of your wise management and ability to look forward, I'm hoping that some of these expected services can be, well, you can ask people if they still expect them or whether they think they're getting their services adequately somewhere else. But I didn't see anything in the discussion that Dave gave about the procedure for the long-range plan where he mentioned an opportunity or an expectation that people would come to you and talk about things like that.
Fair question. I heard, maybe it's just because council speak has now become a second language for me, but I heard that that's next meeting, that the council members are going to be identifying, actually a couple we already did tonight, but the next meeting is where those kinds of conversations will come up, suggestions will come up from the vantage point of the council members. But I think your question, and more importantly, is how do we communicate that to the public so they know which meeting to show up to and share those things? And it sounds to me like it's the June 17th meeting.
Yeah, all the next three meetings.
I mean, any of them can be opportunities for that, but is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, as well as email tomorrow, and phone call the Wednesday after that.
Some of our public are more bashful than I. And they
That's
might need a little more encouragement than I do.
Direct message on Twitter, whatever works.
And so I know the village has a very good outreach program. I don't think you need to make these emergency phone calls to all the village homes to alert them to the budget meetings, but I think you have to do a little bit more than you did
watch out.
for the current meeting in order to encourage participation. And particularly if you can explain to people that this budget picture looks much better than it did before, and therefore the village is in a position to look again at some of the restrictions that were necessary during the Great Recession. And that is a topic that is current with the village. And the next 3 long-range planning meetings might be opportunities to discuss that.
Definitely. I think every long-range planning meeting is an opportunity to discuss that. And I think the real question, it goes back to one of alignment with expectations. And not just because there's a list of things that were cut, do we now then go back to just putting them back because some extra dollars? I think we need to look at the experience of, now that we've had X number of years without them, what have we learned? In some instances, I think we'll find, as you mentioned, that it's being provided in some other way other than the village. And that can happen, that can come in various flavors of ice cream. And that may be a situation where, well, that's still happening. Nature found a way and there it is. Other things may not have happened because of the absence of the village from that space. And then the question becomes, is that something that is in alignment with what the community expects the village to be present in? Now we have the experience of knowing from some passage of time what it's like without it, what it's like with it. Can have that conversation.
We have other facility needs that haven't been addressed. The performance center, community auditorium, things like this that have been talked about in the past.
Right. And are there other paths by which to achieve that, such as through economic development and other partnerships?
We have a strong economic development program now. Maybe we'll be able to do these things in a partnership. But those are topics that I think are associated with the long-range plan for the village. It's not so much an economic plan for the village government, but a long-range plan for the village. Something like we did in TCD 3, and some of those things may be topics you want to examine again, maybe not through this long-range economic plan, but maybe you do want to put in some sort of participatory planning in the community over the next 5-10 years.
Sure.
There have been a lot of changes in the internet. There have been a lot of changes in our understanding of the climate, of what severe storms can do to a community. You have this action by the insurance companies now to try to hold governments responsible for acts of nature. It's a whole new world out there, and I'm saying that this sort of a discussion before you looking into the future is one where these topics ought to be raised. You have to keep your focus on finally coming out with an economic plan, but in the course of discussing what that economic plan is, you can also come up with some other options for the village to pursue in order to, as you say, match expectations with village services, or vice versa.
I knew exactly what you meant.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Tom?
I keep hearing the same phrase, community expectations. Do we know what the community expectations are? For example, the people I talk to, the biggest item is taxes, real estate taxes. Any way to give us a little break here? That would reward us for doing whatever. But how do we get to knowing what the community expectations are? I think some years ago we did a survey. We've done the number 3, TCD 3. We did the other ones. Is it about time to do that again? Since there's perhaps some opportunities, like Gordon says, or maybe other people want to join in on getting to what the community expectations are. Do any of you or all of you know exactly what they are? Is there something we should be doing in this time frame to find that out so that's important?
I think some of that's a fair question. I think some of that's done at some level all the time. I think there are peaks and valleys when there's more of it than other times. There's one tool out there.
Here's a meeting of.
Well, right now,
right
now the two of you are the expectations of the community.
Why isn't there more people?
Oh, it's probably because there's golf ball sized hail outside, but.
Well, it wasn't when we came.
I know, I'm just kidding. But no, you raise a good point, and we're always trying to figure out new ways to get that kind of input, and we do it through some rather labor-intensive and expensive ways periodically. We try not to do that too often because they're labor-intensive and expensive. And then there are more day-to-day routine ways, and obviously all of us are out there, and we hear from people sharing their opinions. I've not found this town to ever be shy about expressing their views on subjects. They find a way to get to you. It's not a problem. But then there's even tools. I think I shared one with Manager Fieldman that I saw demonstrated at National League of Cities last time I was there, where literally there's this, I won't go into a lot of detail, take up everyone's time, but it's raining, you're not going anywhere. Where basically you let every citizen get online with what your general fund is, and using little slider scale choices, sort of set how important different things are to you. But you only have so much money, and so the citizen has to say, well, I want this, and I want that, and I want this. And pretty soon they start to bump up against, well, you don't have that much, so you're going to have to start making the choices. And it allows everybody to sort of on a micro level participate in the same kind of decisions that have to be made in the macro level all the time. Some people are frightened to see those results, other people embrace them. Some communities have them on their website, and it's a real educational tool because it allows people to walk through some of the very decisions that we're having and realizing, well, I want this, but if I have this, I can't have all this, and what do I do? And if the choice is in order to get all of it, I have to raise taxes, well, then you find out
what the expectations of the community are. But that's a fair point, and I think it's something that all municipalities have to continually strive to do as well as they can. And I don't mean to monopolize the conversation,
We
please.
certainly have a track record of, actively and proactively seeking that kind of input from residents. I'm sorry. We certainly have a track record of actively and proactively both seeking that kind of input from residents. And the interim periods between those more pronounced methods and the more consistent methods are, they vary in time. But one thing I just wanted to add to this conversation for this evening is some of this, whether you're operating sliders on a modeling thing or you're wishing that we could build a fine arts center, is sort of sounds a little bit presumptive about our financial condition. We have a much stronger general fund financial cash position than we had 6 years ago. We also got a list, though, as long as our arm, about stuff we're not doing that are basic to the operation of the village, whether they're police stations, village halls, streets. Run down the list. It's sidewalks, available cash for economic development initiatives that come forward to us. The list, in this moment tonight, we have a great cash position and we have some good news to tell. But it's so far away from some sort of we've solved our problems and now have extra money. If we have extra money, I suggest we ought to be giving it back. We don't. And we're a million miles away from having extra money. So I just would caution I'm going to rain on Jeff's second best awesomeness conversation about celebrating good news, because there is a lot of good news about a lot of good actions by village staff over the last 5 years. But we're a million miles away from being some sort of fat, dumb, and happy with a lot of money coming out of our ears kind of condition. We've got tons of huge, major capital needs. We have a continuing trend of personnel and pension-related costs that is not doing anything but heading north. And so I would suggest that any conversations about what other kinds of cool things might we do is way the heck premature.
Right, well, and that assumes that it's other, additional cool things, could be different things. And to your point, might decide we don't need landlines anymore, we're going to go do cell phones.
Fair enough.
But, yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I don't want for the two of you, I don't want you to get the impression that we just have big bags of money.
Well,
Looking at-
and the risk in the community, I mean, certainly there's some history to go on from, 10 years ago relative to the Park District. There is certainly a risk that our messaging gets somehow skewed or taken in a vacuum, looking at a fund balance on a piece of paper.
Right.
We're supposed to have 38.8 or 40%, and all of a sudden we've got 46.5 or whatever it is. Well, shoot, let's just give all the money back. That's such a untotal vocabulary breakdown here, but that's so not the whole picture. And it's important that we're really clear about that in our conversations.
Nope,
and
I agree.
communications.
Yeah, and it's all perspective. I mean, I was looking at it similarly to what you were saying, and I was thinking, boy, we have a fund balance, but we have a lot of work to do. And Gordon was looking at it like, hey, this is great, let's tell everyone to come with their list. So, and then Tom was saying, hey, give us back our money, and use it. So it's all the way everyone looks at it and their perspective, and it's important to think about that.
I think there's another thing that could consider funny, but, we've achieved some of these results by holding down staff. How long are we going to be able to do that? If you're going to provide more services, we need more staff. If we replace these buildings and we can do more, like I say, I think building permits are probably on the increase. I know when I had some work done in my house, it took me 3 weeks. That isn't even the goal for them, but they got there. So I think that's maybe the 400-pound gorilla in the room, that, sooner or later, we're going to have to add some staff. Be realistic.
Any other thoughts, comments, philosophies, poetic observations?
I'm ready for the next meeting.
All right.